T. West's prequel to the very enjoyable X earlier this year. Is it T.I. West? When I see that name, I just want to say T.I. West. Is it Ty West? Is it T. West? I don't know. I don't have the energy to do a simple Google search, so I'm just going to say T. West. I could be wrong. I'm genuinely surprised just how quickly production for this movie took place right after X. I'm not sure exactly the timeline of when all the production took place for this particular movie. I'm just surprised that it came out in the same year that its predecessor came. So for this movie to come out at this time now, at the end of the year, after we gotten some time to witness and watch a bunch of other horror movies that have come out this past spooky season, as well as just throughout the whole year in general, it's been a fun experience to watch a bunch of slasher movies this year, as well as just a bunch of other horror movies in general, but this one stood out for quite different reasons than you would expect. This movie now serves as a complete package for X. It's now just a very cohesive and branching storyline of just a complete story arc of someone's life. And for these movies to tell different stories that have reoccurring characters and themes is just a very cool experience overall, and we don't get that too often. Unless it comes to blockbuster sequels, we don't usually get these sort of titles or these sort of series at this point, I guess I could say, or franchise. I think that's the best word to use. It's like a satisfying conclusion or a satisfying piece to a novel. I reviewed X earlier this year. I will promote it and whore it around. I have no shame whatsoever. Go check it out. Just to give a brief highlight of what I thought about that movie. I thought, again, it was just a fun, very twisted approach to the slasher horror genre with a fixation on the adult film industry, which entailed a lot of dark comedy, for me at least, and just a lot of bloody mayhem that just took place. And it certainly had some standard cliche horror elements, but ones that were still effective by the end, and it was just a welcome addition to an already oversaturated genre. So now with this particular movie, the star role of this prequel was also an actress that was a main character in X, who is now reprising a role as a different character that she technically did play in X as well. I know it's very confusing if you don't watch the movies, or nor do you not know the whole storyline behind it, sorry. The starring role in this movie, Mia Goth, quite remarkable and quite an achievement of just how much range that I never knew she had until now. Pearl. A miserable farm girl has dreams to make it in show business as a dancer on the big screen. How will she react when these aspirations are challenged by the people standing in her way? I rephrase, for those that don't know, this is an origin story for who is basically the antagonist in X, a twisted old woman character who had a fascination with the adult film industry, and particularly adult film performances, and imagining and seeing herself performing in these adult films. All questions about who this twisted woman was in X are all answered here in this origin story. How she was raised, what happened on this farmhouse, and just how she ended up being the way she was is just all presented here for you. This is certainly just a more personal, tragic character story, I would say, more so than your typical standard horror movie, or more so than a heavy slasher even. It's way more character focused and tragic, I would even say. There is certainly some good old gratuitous violence presented here towards the climax of the movie. When our character Pearl snaps and just lets out her fury to everyone around her, we certainly see all that, and it's all very fun to watch, I won't deny it. And there was a surprising amount of practical effects. And the way the movie was shot and formatted, it seemed as though it was intentional to make it look like an old-timey movie, just back when they were shot on old-fashioned film. So the visual presentation really immerses you into the time period that this movie takes place in, which is the early 20th century. There's a bit of a hot take, but Mia Goth's performance, more so character, I would say, just did not impress me too much in X. I thought she was fine. I thought she served the purpose of being the sole survivor of everything that happened and went down in that farmhouse just fine, but she wasn't my favorite character of the bunch that was there. But holy shit, has my perception on her changed after her performance in this. Her portrayal of a broken girl degrading into a love-deprived, unhinged psycho is brutal. It's so brutal and it's so glorious at the same time. There's such a twisted enchantment with the way her performance is and the way her character is written. It's very odd because it seems as though the script is intentionally wanting us to root for her downfall, or at least root for her to reach that breaking point where she's just had enough of the way she is treated or mistreated and just lets it all out. And we, the audience, are just a fly on the wall watching this poor girl take an absolute beating in life, and to just ultimately say, I've had enough, and I'm going to let the world know that I've had enough. It is really the most terrifying aspect of this whole movie. Out of everything else that is presented in the advertisement or the trailers that you may see, this is it. This is the pinnacle of what is so disturbing, I feel, in both of these movies. This particular character. I didn't know this, but she also played old woman version of Pearl even in X. I didn't know this at the time. I found out after watching this movie, and holy shit. Just the whole character story tale of just this broken woman who's just turned into just this haunting persona. I would say this, her performance in this movie, it's absolutely a contender for best leading performance I've seen this whole year. So much raw emotion when she's expressing anger or sadness. Quick note, I also noticed they showed that when people cry, they don't look pretty. That's not what crying is. So many movies just show already super attractive looking actors still looking good when they're having a breakdown or when they're having an existential crisis. They still look all dolled up with their makeup and everything. This was one of the first movies I've seen in so long, or maybe even ever, where it really wasn't shy to show you just how we humans look when we are in just an absolute state in ourselves. We got to see Mia Goth just let it all out. Small things like seeing just the makeup get absolutely ruined on her character to watching snot run down her nose. It's so real. And that's literally what crying is really like for those who have had a really good cry. And I didn't think or know just how effective it really is in just really selling and portraying a character's performance. X certainly had more traditional elements of horror with jump scares, cat and mouse chase sequences, and a foreboding atmosphere all around. The tone here in Pearl is much more jolly. Like I said before earlier, it has such a engaging whimsicality to it. Even throughout the whole time that we're seeing all this gratuitous violence, it's still shot and lit like some sort of fairy tale. It's just a great contrast to what we saw in X. It just creates a sensation of uneasiness, and that is so creepy. Watching Pearl find ways around to live her life to the fullest in pursuing her dreams and her goals of wanting to just perform, only to be constantly shot down by her borderline abusive by today's standards parents, specifically her mother and her crippled father, who at this point, they even made jokes, poked fun at how his life is not even worth living at that point if he's just degrading the life value of those around him that always had to take care of him. It's just miserable and draining to watch. Especially if you yourself have experienced a household similar to this, or even know someone dear to you that has experienced a household like this before. I will say that even though the storyline is a lot more straightforward in this than in X, it's a very classic tale. It's a very straightforward story of what would be a protagonist turned antagonist. A part of me always enjoys a straightforward tale for sure, but I will acknowledge and say that nothing a lot happens in this movie in terms of the beat structures of the script. And the few things that do happen, there is some time in between because, again, this movie is a lot more character focused, therefore it's going to feel like the pacing is just naturally slower and it's taken a while to get to these certain climactic points than in X. With the amount of twists and turns that were in X, I was hoping for more of those jaw-dropping story beat changes here in Pearl, but I didn't really feel I got that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just making the comparison there naturally with X. However, what this movie really did was make me want to rewatch X and then just rewatch Pearl right after that. And that to me warrants a successful prequel story. There haven't been too many prequel stories in any media that encourages me to want to return to the story that takes place after that, the original. Usually most prequel stories just don't warrant it, or they're just not as interesting, or nor do they leave an impactful tone to make you want to go back and watch the previous content that came out before. But I really do here. I highly encourage all of you to go out and support these two movies. This is a whole package, it feels, and one that we don't get too often anymore with smaller budget horror movies like this, or even just smaller budget movies in general. And again, like I say, of all studios, of course, it had to be A24 that always approves and always just allows their filmmakers to really push art and to really push these concepts further. 7 out of 10, less spooky elements than X, a more personal story with incredible performances. I'm a store.